The passenger door of the 1985 Chevrolet C10 wouldn't close right unless you lifted up while you slammed it. Tyler Hofstetter had the motion down to muscle memory by 2004. Lift, slam, check the latch, sometimes slam again. The truck was two-tone now, but not by design. The original red had faded to pink on the hood and roof where the sun hit hardest. The replacement door from the junkyard was brown. The toolbox was gray primer. Nobody would call it pretty. Tyler pulled into Farmers Cooperative elevator on a Tuesday morning in March 2004, easing past Randy Kowalski's new Ford F-250. Fire engine red chrome package, leather interior that probably cost more than Tyler's entire truck was worth in 1985. Randy was inside settling up on his corn delivery, but Tyler could see him through the window, laughing with the elevator manager, probably telling another joke. Randy was good at jokes. Randy was good at a lot of things. Tyler's truck ticked and pinged as it cooled. The odometer had rolled over twice. 368,000 miles, near as he could figure. The bench seat was torn where the springs poked through. He'd covered it with an old moving blanket, secured with duct tape. The radio worked, but only AM, and only if you held the antenna at a certain angle. That thing still running? Randy said when he came out, grinning. It wasn't mean exactly. Randy had known Tyler since they were kids in 4-H together. Thought you'd have upgraded by now. Hell, Tyler, corn's at $2.40. You can afford something from this century. Tyler smiled and nodded. He was good at smiling and nodding. What Randy didn't know, what nobody in Shelby County, Iowa, really knew, was that Tyler had $247,000 in a money market account at Harlan Savings Bank, another $180,000 in CDs, and no debt. Not on equipment, not on land, not on anything. At 26 years old, Tyler Hofstetter was probably the most liquid farmer within 50 miles. He just didn't look like it. What I'm about to tell you is based on documented patterns that occurred across the Midwest during the mid-2000s commodity boom. While I've combined details from multiple real cases and added narrative elements for storytelling, every economic trend, every piece of equipment I'll mention, and every financial decision you'll hear about is grounded in USDA data, Federal Reserve Agricultural Lending reports, and interviews with farmers who navigated this era. The numbers are real. The choices were real. The consequences that followed were devastatingly real. Let me take you back to how this started, because Tyler's story didn't begin in 2004. It began in 1998, when his grandfather Lawrence died and left the farm to Tyler's father Dan. Dan was 53 then, and he'd been farming alongside Lawrence for 25 years. He knew every inch of their 480 acres. He knew the low spots that would drown in a wet spring. He knew which fields would produce even in a drought. He knew where the tile lines ran and which ones needed replacing. What Dan didn't know was that Lawrence had kept immaculate financial records. When Tyler helped clean out the old farmhouse, they found ledgers going back to 1947. Lawrence had recorded every expense, every crop sale, every equipment purchase. More than that, he'd calculated his profit per acre every single year. And Tyler, 20 years old and fresh out of Iowa State with an AG economics degree, read those ledgers like they were scripture. The pattern was clear. The years Lawrence made money weren't the years he bought new equipment. They weren't the years he expanded. They were the years he kept his costs low and his grain in storage until prices recovered. Lawrence had survived the 1950s squeeze, the 1970s boom and bust, and the 1980s farm crisis by doing one thing: spending less than he made. Every single year. No exceptions. Your grandfather was cheap. Tyler's mother said when she saw Tyler studying the ledgers for the third night in a row. He had money and he lived like a pauper. He had money because he lived like a pauper, Tyler said. By 2000, Tyler was 22 and farming with his father full-time. Dan paid him a salary, $24,000 a year, and Tyler lived in the old hired hand house on the farm. It had 2 rooms, a bathroom with a shower leaked, and a kitchen from 1965. Tyler didn't mind. He was banking $18,000 a year after expenses. Corn was trading at $1.85. Beans were $4.54. These were hard years, lean years. Every farm around them was complaining. The government was issuing emergency payments to keep operations afloat. Land values were stagnant. Tyler was saving. Then his father had the conversation. It was December 2003, 2 days before Christmas. They were in the shop, changing oil on the John Deere 4440, and Dan just came out with it. "I'm thinking about retiring." Dan said, "Not completely, but I'm 58 and your mother wants to travel, wants to see her sister in Arizona, wants to do things while we still can." Tyler kept his hand on the oil drain, watching the black stream splash into the pan. "I'm not selling," Dan continued, "but I'm thinking maybe you take over. Run it yourself. I'd still help at harvest, still be around, but the decisions would be yours. The profit would be yours. The risk would be yours. And the debt?" Tyler asked. "We don't have any debt," Dan said. "Never did. Not since I paid off a land loan in '89. Equipment's old, but it's paid for. Land's paid for. You'd be starting free and clear." Tyler was 25 years old. He had $127,000 in the bank. His father was offering him a debt-free farming operation with 480 acres, a full line of machinery, and complete control. On January 1st, 2004, Tyler Hofstetter became the primary operator of Hofstetter Farms. The 1985 Chevy had been his grandfather's truck. Tyler had been driving it since he was 16. It had hauled manure, pulled trailers, carried tools, and somehow kept running despite having more rust than metal in the bed. When Tyler officially took over, one of the first things his father said was, "You should probably get yourself a decent vehicle, something that won't embarrass you." Tyler thought about it. He could afford a new truck. Hell, at $35,000, he could pay cash for a decent F-150 and still have money left over. But new trucks depreciated. They were expensive to insure. They required payments, even if you bought cash, because your insurance and maintenance and fuel on those big modern engines ate up money every month. The '85 Chevy cost him maybe $600 a year to keep running. Parts were cheap. Gas was cheaper. It was paid for. He kept the old truck. If you're farming right now, or if you know someone who is, you understand the pressure I'm about to describe. It's not just about money. It's about how you're perceived, how your neighbors judge you, how the coffee shop conversations go quiet when you walk in wearing coveralls with patches instead of new Carhartt. What's the biggest judgment you've faced about your financial choices? Tell me in the comments, because this story is about more than farming. It's about having the guts to live differently than everyone around you. Corn prices started moving in 2004. Nothing dramatic. They climbed from $2 in January to $2.40 by fall. Beans went from $5.50 to $5.80. Tyler had a good crop that year. 480 acres of corn yielded 172 bushels to the acre. At $2.30 average, gross revenue was about $190,000. After expenses, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, equipment maintenance, land taxes, crop insurance, Tyler netted $71,000. He paid himself $28,000 as salary. He banked $43,000. His checking account balance at the end of 2004, $170,000. Randy Kowalski had a good year too. Randy farmed 1,200 acres. 800 he owned, 400 he rented. Randy had bought his land in 1997 when prices were low, financed through Farm Credit Services at 7.2% interest. He had good equipment. A 2001 John Deere 8310, a 2003 9650 combine, a 24-row 1770 planter. His operation was bigger, smoother, more modern than Tyler's. And in 2004, Randy bought that new F-250. $38,000, Randy told the guys at the co-op. But hell, with the trade-in it was only $22 out of pocket. Financing's at 2.9%. Can't beat that. Tyler was standing there when Randy said it. Tyler did the math in his head. $22,000 financed at 2.9% over 5 years was about $395 a month, plus insurance on a new truck, ran about $150 a month, plus fuel, because those big diesel engines got maybe 12 miles per gallon. Figure $80 a month in fuel, probably more. Randy was spending $625 a month on his truck. That was $7,500 a year. Tyler's annual truck expense, $600. The difference, $6,900. Tyler kept driving the '85 Chevy. By 2005, something was changing in the agricultural economy. Ethanol plants were starting to appear across Iowa and Nebraska. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 mandated the blending of renewable fuels into gasoline. Suddenly, corn wasn't just food and feed, it was fuel. Demand was increasing. Prices were responding. Corn that sold for $2.40 in the fall of 2004 was trading at $2.80 by spring 2005. Tyler planted 480 acres of corn again. He used his father's old John Deere 4440, a 1982 model that produced 130 horsepower and burned about 5 gallons of fuel an hour. Modern tractors were more efficient, more comfortable, more capable, but the 4440 still worked. Tyler knew every quirk in its hydraulics. He knew you had to feather the clutch in fourth gear or it would buck. He knew the cab heater only worked if you blocked off the left vent with duct tape. He knew. He planted with a 12-row IH 800 planter from 1979. White with red trim, manual markers, mechanical drive. The neighbors have been replacing their old planters with new ones. The new Kins and John Deere planters had GPS, variable rate capability, row shutoffs. They cost $80,000 to $140,000. Tyler's planter had cost $1,200 at an auction in 2002. He'd replaced the disc openers, rebuilt the meters, and adjusted the gauge wheels. It planted corn just fine. Harvest 2005 was strong. The whole Midwest had good yields. Tyler's corn came off at 181 bushels per acre. He sold half of it at harvest for $2.65. The other half he put in the old grain bins on the farm. 3 bins that held about 45,000 bushels total. These were old bins, early 1970s vintage, manual aeration, no fancy monitoring systems. But they were dry, the fans worked, and storage was storage. By March 2006, corn was at $3.10. Tyler sold the stored corn. His 2005 net income, after all expenses, $94,000. He paid himself $30,000. He banked $64,000. Account balance, $234,000. Randy Kowalski had another good year too, but Randy was expanding. He'd rented another 200 acres from a retiring farmer. He bought a new planter, a 24-row John Deere 1760 with GPS and variable rate. Cost, $127,000, financed through John Deere Financial at 4.9% for 7 years. The payment was $1,700 a month. Can't pass it up, Randy told Tyler over coffee at the Country Cafe in Harlan. Hell, Tyler, with corn prices where they are, this plan will pay for itself in 3 years. And you know what? Image matters. When the landlords see you running modern equipment, they know you're serious. They know you're going to take care of their ground. Tyler nodded. He was always nodding. You really ought to update your operation, Randy continued. I mean, how old is your planter? That thing's at be 30 years old. Don't you worry about parts? Breakdowns? It works, Tyler said. Sure, but I don't know, man. We're making good money. Why not enjoy it a little? Get something that makes your life easier. Tyler thought about that drive home in the '85 Chevy. The heater was broken now, had been since December. He wore a Carhartt coat and gloves while he drove. The windshield had a crack that ran from corner to corner. The odometer read 387,000 miles. He could buy a new truck. He could buy a new planter. He could finance it like Randy and make payments out of crop revenue. Everyone else was doing it. The farm equipment dealers were busier than they'd been in 20 years. There was a confidence in the air, a sense that things had turned around, that agriculture was entering a new era of profitability. Tyler went home and opened his grandfather's ledgers. He read the entries from 1977, 1978, 1979. Corn prices had climbed then too. Land values had shot up. Farmers had borrowed to expand. Equipment dealers had sold record numbers of tractors and combines. Then 1980 hit. 1981, 1982. Prices collapsed. Interest rates hit 21%. Farms that had leveraged themselves into the boom went bankrupt in the bust. Tyler closed the ledgers. He made his decision. He would not borrow. He would not buy unless he could pay cash. He would not mistake a price increase for a permanent change. He kept driving the '85 Chevy. He kept farming with the old equipment. And the neighbors slowly started to talk. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever been judged for making a financially smart choice instead of the comfortable choice? I want to know, what's harder, the sacrifice itself or the judgment from people who don't understand what you're doing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. By 2007, the commodity boom was undeniable. Corn hit $4 a bushel in the summer. The ethanol plants were running at capacity, demanding every bushel they could get. Soybeans climbed to $10. The entire agricultural economy was on fire, and everyone was spending. New pickups lined the streets in Harlan every Saturday. At the implement dealer, there was a waiting list for combines. The coffee shop conversations were about expansion, who was buying land, who was renting more acres, who had upgraded to the biggest tractor in the dealer's lot. The bank was lending aggressively. Land values in Shelby County climbed from $2,800 an acre in 2004 to $3,600 an acre by fall of 2007. Tyler planted his 480 acres with the same old equipment. Harvest 2007 was massive, 193 bushels per acre on corn. He sold at $3.85 average. Revenue exceeded $250,000. After expenses, he netted $142,000. He paid himself $35,000. He banked $107,000. Account balance, $341,000. He was also starting to draw attention, not the good kind. You see, Tyler still driving that piece of shit Chevy? Someone said in the parts department at the dealer. Tyler was 3 aisles over, picking up hydraulic fluid, and he heard every word. I don't get it. Another voice replied. He's got to be making money. He's got nearly 500 acres of good ground. No rent. Why doesn't he get himself something decent? Maybe he's cheap. Maybe he's stupid. Hell, maybe the poor bastard is broke. Tyler paid for his hydraulic fluid and left without saying anything. The talk got worse. At church, people started treating him differently. The assumption was spreading. Tyler Hofstetter was struggling. Why else would a young farmer, prime years, good land, rising prices, be driving a truck from 1985 with mismatched doors and a bed made of rust? Why else would he still be farming with a planter from the 1970s and a tractor from the 1980s? The perception became reality in people's minds. Tyler was poor. Tyler couldn't afford better. Tyler was one bad crop from going under. Randy Kowalski never said directly, but the sympathy in his voice said everything. Hey, if you ever need help, Randy told Tyler one afternoon in August 2007, I mean it. Times get tough, you let me know. I've been there. Tyler just nodded. Randy hadn't been there. Randy had never been there. Randy had financed his way through the lean years in the late 1990s, borrowed to expand in the early 2000s, and was now leveraging himself deeper into the boom. Randy now farmed 1,800 acres. He bought a new John Deere 8430 in 2006, 305 horsepower, auto track ready, $248,000. He traded combines again, upgrading to a 9870 STS with a 12-row corn head, $420,000 total package, both financed. He'd built a new machine shed, $180,000 financed. He bought another new truck for his wife, a Ford Expedition, $47,000 financed. Randy's operation was impressive, modern, efficient, professional. Randy's debt was also approaching $2 million. According to USDA Economic Research Service data from this period, total farm debt in the United States climbed from $213 billion in 2004 to $257 billion by 2007. The debt-to-asset ratio for farms in the Midwest hovered around 12 to 14%, which seemed manageable during the boom years. But here's what many farmers didn't consider. That ratio assumed land values would stay high, commodity prices would stay strong, and interest rates would stay low. Change any one of those variables, and the math got ugly fast. Change all three, and farms went under. Let me tell you what happened in 2008, because this is where the tide started to turn, even though most people didn't see it yet. Corn spiked in June 2008 to over $7 a bushel. It was insane. Farmers who had grain in storage were cashing checks they'd never dreamed of. Tyler sold his 2007 stored corn in July for $6.85. His bank account crossed $400,000. He was 29 years old. Then September came. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The stock market crashed. The credit markets froze. The global financial system teetered on the edge of complete failure. And commodities, which had been driven partly by financial speculation, came tumbling down. Corn dropped from $7 in June to $3.50 by December. Soybeans fell from $16 to $9. But something strange happened. Agriculture, which should have been devastated by the financial crisis, was actually okay. The ethanol demand was real. The crop insurance programs worked. Farmers had locked in prices earlier in the year. Rural banks, which hadn't been involved in the subprime mortgage disaster, stayed solvent. Land values dipped slightly but didn't crash. The 2008 harvest was enormous. Tyler's corn yielded 201 bushels per acre. He'd priced half his crop in the spring at $5.80. The other half sold a harvest for $3.60. Average, $4.70. Even with prices off their peak, his gross revenue was $227,000. After expenses, $128,000 net. Account balance, $528,000. He was still driving the '85 Chevy. The transmission was slipping now. He'd replaced the starter twice that year. The brake lines were rusted to the point where his mechanic said they probably shouldn't be legal. Tyler replaced the brake lines himself, lying under the truck on the gravel driveway in October, cold rain dripping through the frame onto his face. "Why?" his mother asked when she stopped by and found him under there, soaked and covered in rust flakes. "Tyler, why? You can afford a truck. You can afford 10 trucks. This one still works," Tyler said. But here's what Tyler saw that others didn't. The financial crisis had exposed something important. Debt was dangerous when markets turned. Randy Kowalski had survived 2008 because commodity prices, overall, had still been strong. But what if they hadn't been? What if corn had dropped to $2 instead of $3.50? Randy's debt payments didn't change when prices fell. His land payments, his equipment payments, his operating loan interest, all of that was fixed. His revenue was variable. That gap was where farms died. Tyler studied his operations numbers every Sunday evening. He had spreadsheets now on an old Dell computer he bought used for $200. He tracked every expense to the penny. He knew his cost of production was $2.87 per bushel for corn, $7.23 per bushel for beans. He knew that as long as prices stayed above those levels, he made money, and because he had no debt, he could survive years where prices dipped below his costs. His grandfather's savings, plus his own discipline, gave him a cushion that most farmers didn't have. The years 2009 and 2010 were steady. Not spectacular, but steady. Corn prices recovered to $3.50 to $4. Soybeans traded around $9.50 to $10. Tyler kept his costs low, kept his old equipment running, and kept banking money. By January 2010, his account balance was $687,000. He was 31 years old. He still drove the '85 Chevy, which now had 412,000 miles and required a screwdriver to start because the ignition switch was broken. The county sheriff had stopped him twice to ask if the vehicle was safe to drive. Tyler assured him it was. Barely. Then March 2010 brought the conversation that changed everything. Tyler was hauling an auger back from a neighbor's farm when he saw Randy Kowalski's truck pulled off on the side of the road. Randy was sitting in the cab, engine running, just staring straight ahead. Tyler pulled up behind him. Something was wrong. "You okay?" Tyler asked. Randy looked at him. His eyes were red. "They called the loan." "What?" "Farm credit. They called my operating loan. Said my debt-to-asset ratio was too high. Said they were concerned about my cash flow. They want me to reduce my line by $300,000 by July, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings." Tyler felt something drop in his stomach. "Can you do it?" "I don't know." Randy's voice was hollow. "I've got crop in the ground. I've got equity in the land. But I'm a liquid. Everything's tied up. They know that. They're squeezing me." "Why?" "Because a farm down in Cass County defaulted last month. Another one in Crawford County. The bank's getting nervous. They're tightening up on anybody who looks risky." Randy laughed, but there was no humor in it. 10 years ago, they were begging me to borrow more. Now they want it back. Tyler didn't know what to say. He'd never been in debt. He'd never faced a banker who held that kind of power over his life. "They're going to take it," Randy said quietly. "They're going to take my farm. Everything I built. My dad's land. Everything." That's when Tyler started thinking about something he'd never seriously considered before. He had $687,000 in liquid assets. Randy farmed 1,800 acres. 800 he owned, 1,000 he rented. If Randy lost a farm, that land would go up for sale. Tyler went home and did the math. Land in Shelby County was selling for about $4,200 an acre now, up from the $3,600 it had been in 2007. Randy's 800 acres, if it went to auction, might bring $3.2 million. But if Tyler could buy it directly, negotiate with Randy and the bank before it went to foreclosure, he might get it for less. And if he could pay cash, or at least put down a substantial down payment, he'd have leverage in the negotiation. For 3 weeks, Tyler thought about it. He drove his routes, worked his ground, and ran scenarios. Could he afford it? Should he leverage himself after years of avoiding debt? Was this the opportunity his grandfather's discipline had been preparing him for? Then Randy came to see him. It was a Thursday evening in April. Randy drove up in the red F-250, which was showing some age now, but still looked good. Tyler was in the shop, working on the planter. "I need to ask you something," Randy said. "And you can say no, but I'm asking." "Okay. Would you consider buying my farm?" Tyler set down his wrench. "What?" "The bank's going to take it. One way or another, I'm losing it. But if I can sell before the foreclosure, I can at least walk away with something. Pay off the debt, keep a little equity. Otherwise, they take it all." Randy's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "You've got no debt. You've been farming conservatively. I know you've been saving. Hell, everyone knows you don't spend money on anything. You might be the only farmer in the county who could actually pay cash." There it was, the moment, the conversation that would define everything. "How much?" Tyler asked. $3 million for the whole 800 acres. "I know market value is higher, but I need to move fast. Bank says if I can bring them $2.1 million to clear the land debt, they'll release it. The other $900,000 would be mine. I could pay off my equipment loans, settle my operating line, and still walk away with maybe $200,000. Tyler did the math. $3 million for 800 acres was $3,750 per acre. That was below market. It was a deal, but it was also everything. His savings, everything he'd built, would go into this purchase. "Can I think about it?" Tyler asked. 1 week, Randy said. "That's what the bank gave me. Here's my question for you. Would you take this deal? You spent 10 years living cheap, saving every dollar, enduring mockery and judgment. Now there's a chance to become something bigger. But if you do it, you'll be leveraged again. You'll have debt. You'll be like everyone else. What would you do?" Drop a comment. Tyler spent that weekend with spreadsheets, calculators, and his grandfather's old ledgers. The math was clear. 800 acres at 180 bushels per acre average yield meant 144,000 bushels of corn. At $4 corn, that was $576,000 in gross revenue. If his cost of production stayed at $2.87, his net per bushel was $1.13, times 144,000 bushels, which meant $162,720 in profit per year just from the new ground. That was separate from his existing 480 acres. But the purchase price was $3 million. He had $687,000 cash. That meant he'd need to borrow $2,313,000. At 5.5% interest over 20 years, the annual payment would be about $190,000. His profit from the land wouldn't cover the payment. He'd need his existing farm's income to make the payments. It was tight. It was risky. It was exactly the kind of leverage he'd been avoiding for 10 years. Tyler called his father. Dan came over that evening. They sat in the old farmhouse kitchen, the same kitchen where Tyler had read his grandfather's ledgers 12 years earlier. "What do you think?" Tyler asked. Dan looked at the numbers. "It's a gamble." "Yeah, but it's a calculated gamble. You're not buying toys. You're buying productive ground, good soil, and you're buying below market. If you can make the payments for 5 years, the land value appreciation alone would probably cover your risk. What if prices fall? Then you do what your grandfather did. You tighten your belt. You survive. But Tyler, you've got something most farmers don't. You've got discipline. You know how to live cheap. You know how to wait out bad years. This might be the one time in your life where debt makes sense." Tyler looked at his father. "You think I should do it?" "I think you'll regret it if you don't." On Monday, Tyler met with Randy and made the offer. $3 million. He'd put down $687,000 cash. He'd financed the rest through Harlan Savings Bank, who'd been Tyler's bank since he was born. The bank, which knew Tyler's financial history, which knew his discipline, which knew he'd never miss a payment on anything in his life, approved the loan in 3 days. The closing was scheduled for May 15th, 2010. Tyler drove to the closing in the '85 Chevy. It was ridiculous. He knew he was about to close on a $3 million land purchase, and he showed up in a truck held together with duct tape and rust. But it was his truck. It had carried him through 10 years of discipline. It seemed right to finish the journey with it. The closing took 2 hours. Documents were signed. Checks were transferred. When it was done, Tyler Hofstetter owned 1,280 acres of Iowa farmland. Randy Kowalski walked away with enough money to pay his debts and start over somewhere smaller. They shook hands in the parking lot. Randy looked at Tyler's truck and laughed. It wasn't mean anymore. It was genuine. "You actually did it," Randy said. "Everyone thought you were broke. Everyone thought you were barely hanging on. And the whole time you were saving. Yeah. Why didn't you tell anyone? Would it have mattered?" Randy thought about that. "Probably not. I still would have bought the new trucks, the new equipment. I still would have thought you were crazy." He paused. "I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Tyler said. "You just made different choices." Randy nodded. He climbed into the red F-250. Tyler watched him drive away. Then Tyler got back in the '85 Chevy, turned the screwdriver in the ignition, and drove home. He had $2.3 million in debt now. He had land payments that would stretch for 20 years. He had given up his safety net to make this purchase. But he also had 1,280 acres. He had productive ground. He had equity that would grow. And he had something else, something harder to quantify. He had proof that discipline worked, that patience worked, that you could succeed by swimming against the current, by ignoring the judgment, by living below your means even when everyone thought you were crazy. The story of Tyler Hofstetter's cash purchase of Randy Kowalski's farm spread through Shelby County like wildfire. The narrative shifted overnight. The poor farmer in the rusty truck became the financial genius who'd played the long game. People who'd mocked him wanted to know his secret. Equipment dealers who'd written him off suddenly treated him with respect. Landlords who'd never considered him for their rental grounds started calling. Tyler still drove the '85 Chevy. He drove it until September 2010, when the frame finally cracked beyond repair. He replaced it with a 1998 Ford F-150 he bought at an auction for $3,200. The 98 Ford had 200,000 miles and a dent in the bed, but the heater worked, the transmission was solid, and it would probably last him another 10 years. He still farmed with old equipment. The 4440 tractor, now nearly 30 years old, still pulled the planter every spring. The IH 800 planter, now past 40 years old, still dropped seeds in the ground. Tyler maintained everything meticulously, replaced what needed replacing, and ignored what didn't. Now let me tell you about the years that followed, because this is where the story gets complicated. Tyler had bet that he could manage debt, that he could make the land payments, that he could survive the leverage. And for the most part, he was right. Corn prices climbed again in 2011 and 2012. The 2012 drought devastated yields across the Midwest, but Tyler's crop insurance covered most of his losses. When corn briefly touched $8 in August 2012, Tyler sold enough stored grain to make 3 years of land payments in advance. By 2015, Tyler's debt was down to $1.8 million. His land, now worth $6,500 per acre in Shelby County, represented $8.3 million in assets. His equity had grown to $6.5 million. On paper, Tyler Hofstadter was a wealthy man. But here's what the story doesn't always tell you. Tyler was 36 years old. He'd never been married. He'd never traveled farther than South Dakota. He lived in the same two-room hired hand's house he'd moved into at 22. He'd given up 14 years of his life to accumulate wealth on a balance sheet. When he went to his 15th high school reunion in 2016, people wanted to talk to him, the successful farmer, the financial wizard. But Tyler looked around the room and saw classmates who become teachers, engineers, nurses. They had smaller bank accounts, but they had families. They had memories of vacations, of concerts, of experiences that Tyler had sacrificed in pursuit of a number in a ledger. Was it worth it? That's the question Tyler asked himself sometimes, late at night, sitting in the old farmhouse that still had the same furniture from his grandfather's time. He'd won by most measures. He'd proven that discipline could triumph over debt, that patience could beat leverage, that you could succeed by being the turtle instead of the hare. But he'd also lost something. Time, youth, the years you can't get back. He'd spent his 20s and early 30s driving a rust bucket truck and eating cheap food and skipping weddings because he couldn't justify the expense of a gift. He'd made the financially correct decision every single time. And he'd ended up alone with a bank statement. In 2018, Tyler started dating a woman named Sarah who taught at the elementary school in Harlan. She was 33, had grown up on a farm but left for college and never came back. When she asked him why he'd never traveled, never splurged, never lived beyond the basics, Tyler didn't have a good answer. "I was building something," he said. "But what's it for?" she asked. That question stayed with him. In 2019, Tyler bought a new truck. Not new, a 2015 Silverado with 70,000 miles. He paid $28,000. It was the most he'd ever spent on a vehicle, and it felt wrong for months. But Sarah liked it. She liked having a truck that didn't require a screwdriver to start, that had heat and air conditioning, that didn't spray rust water on her dress when they drove over puddles. They got married in May 2020. Tyler was 41. His debt was down to $1.4 million. His land was worth $9 million. He was financially secure in ways most farmers could only dream of. But he also started farming differently. He bought a newer tractor, not new, but a 2012 John Deere 8310R with 310 horsepower and a comfortable cab. It cost $168,000, and he paid cash. He traded in his old combines for something more modern. He built a new shop. He started spending money. Not recklessly, never recklessly, but he spent it. Because what he'd learned from Randy Kowalski's collapse wasn't just that debt was dangerous. It was that life had to be lived, that you could be financially right and existentially wrong, that the numbers on the balance sheet were a means, not an end. This channel exists because these stories matter, not just as historical lessons, but as frameworks for the decisions you're making right now. Tyler's story isn't about being cheap. It's about having clarity on what you're building and why. It's about understanding that discipline has a cost, and that cost isn't always financial. Subscribe if you want more stories that explore the real complexity of farming life, because it's never as simple as the headlines make it sound. I want to leave you with something Tyler told me when I talked to him about this story. He's 50 now, in 2024. He farms 2,200 acres. His debt is paid off completely. His land is worth about $12 million. His son, who's 23, is deciding whether to come back to farm or take a job in Des Moines doing agricultural software development. The discipline was right, Tyler said. Saving was right. Avoiding debt in the boom years was right. But I wish someone had told me you can't just save forever. At some point, you have to build a life worth living. The money's supposed to serve that. I got it backward for a long time. He paused. I don't regret buying the farm. That was the right move. But I regret the truck. The rusty piece of shit I drove for 10 years because I was too stubborn to spend $8,000 on something better. That wasn't discipline. That was fear disguised as virtue. And it cost me more than money. The 1985 Chevy is gone now, sold for scrap in 2010 for $300. But its legacy remains in Shelby County, where farmers still tell the story of the young man who looked poor and turned out to be rich, who lived cheap and bought smart, who proved that patience beats leverage. They called him poor because he drove a rusty pickup. They didn't know he was building an empire from the inside out. And when he finally made his move, paying cash for 800 acres while everyone else was drowning in debt, the lesson was clear. Appearance and reality are different things. What looks like poverty might be discipline. What looks like success might be desperation. The man in the newest truck isn't necessarily winning, and the man in the rust bucket might be the smartest person in the county. Tyler Hofstetter understood what his grandfather Lawrence had understood 50 years earlier. Farming isn't about what you drive. It's about what you keep. It's about having the guts to look poor when you're building wealth. It's about ignoring the judgment and staying true to the math. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about knowing when the math says to take the risk, to make the move, to bet on yourself when the opportunity appears. The 2000s agricultural boom created two types of farmers: those who borrowed to chase the rising prices, and those who saved to prepare for the inevitable correction. Randy Kowalski and Tyler Hofstetter represented these two paths. One was exciting, impressive, modern. The other was boring, invisible, old-fashioned. One led to foreclosure. The other led to ownership. The difference was in the truck and the discipline behind it and the clarity to know that wealth isn't what you show the world. It's what you keep when the world stops watching.